This is part two of talking about the different phases of COVID so that we can have a better appreciation of it. Last time, everything here that I'm circling to the left, we were talking about the acute infection phase of COVID. So, this is when you're actively sick with COVID. So, if we zoom in, we talked a lot about the different types of infection phases going from no infection to death, and if you're infectious to others, among other things. We talked a little bit about vaccination and then how COVID can actually spread. Today, we're going to talk about more of the process of the infection itself and Paxlovid treatment, in addition to some of the nuances that can happen or additional things that can happen with infection. Now, for a lot of people that have been following COVID, you've probably seen this chart before. This is the chart for infection duration. It was something that was created in 2020. If you're still referencing this chart, you should not be, because this is actually outdated information at this point. So it will give people false information by referencing this. So this should really only be used to reference COVID variants from 2020 to 2022. That's what this is accurate to. This is what it actually represents. Everything after 2022, this curving has changed, but we'll do a quick brief overview. So it's a little confusing. I wouldn't necessarily, if I was making this chart, do it this way, but it's still good information. So day 0 is when the infection would be full blown, when they're considering it peak viral load. So you're going to be, let's start from the beginning. So right here, you have infection. This is when you are exposed and then have contracted COVID. There's a brief window of time where you're the virus is replicating, but nothing's really happened yet. This is called the incubation period. After that incubation period, the viral load starts to increase and increase and increase. So you'll see that this is a few days before symptoms have occurred. After that increase, it can start to be detected by PCR positive. This is all going to be before symptoms occur. This will continue to increase, and then it'll be positive on a rapid test. So AGRDT is one way you can say a rapid test, or a rapid antigen test. So it'll be positive there. So you're going to be detecting positive on a PCR. You need a much lower viral load to be able to test positive on that before you would test positive on a rapid test. And then after that, you would continue to have an increase in viral load. You'd start to have symptoms where you'd actually start to feel sick. But it's important to know that if we're looking at infectious viral load, so you'll be increasing in viral load. And then at some point, there'll be a threshold, which you'll just start to be detected positive on the rapid test. So if you're positive on a rapid test, you should know that you are indeed infectious to other people. Even if it's lightly positive, that means you're still infectious to others. But also, we have to understand that rapid tests have lost sensitivity over time. So you'll actually be infectious to others for a period of time before that now tests positive on those. So we have, anyways, going back to this yellow curve down here, this inner curve. So essentially, this is like a stacked curve. So we're saying you're building viral load. It's not like you're going down to 0, but you're building viral load. And then this yellow curve technically would start here. So this whole, if we cut here, from here to here, that's what this infectious viral load is. So it's increasing. You hit that threshold, and then it's increasing. So this peak here is the same as this peak here. Again, I wouldn't do this plot this way myself because I think it's confusing to people seeing it like this. But essentially, it's just kind of like a stepwise. So you're increasing infectivity, infectious viral load. And then after that, it's starting to go down. But again, it's maintaining for a period of time. So if we look at this plot here from the early 2020s, we see that symptom onset occurs a little bit before day 0 onset of symptoms. Because I think what they're doing here is they're saying, oh, you won't necessarily recognize that you're symptomatic for a brief period of time, like a day or two. Which again, this 0, I think, should be right here at the beginning of symptoms. It's saying time since symptom onset. So the beginning of symptoms the 0 should be there. Again, I don't like how they did this plot. But we go, you get the infection gets worse, and then it starts to taper over time as your body fights it and it gets better. Um, and then you stop being infectious after a certain point of time, and then you continue to have virus in you, but at lower levels to be infectious, but still detectable by PCR. So you'll hit negative on a rapid antigen test before you'll hit negative on a PCR test. So the PCR is not good to tell if you're infectious or not, because it's going to detect very low levels. So you may or may not be infectious if you're PCR positive, and you could either be at the beginning of an infection or the end of an infection. The PCR is not good for letting you know either or, but it is good to tell if you have been infected at all with COVID. So that's why it's important. So that's sort of the breakdown of this right here. I have my own plot here, which I'll go over in a second. So if I were to make this plot in early 2020 for COVID infections, this is how I would have done it. I would have a single infection curve right here showing increasing viral load. So you would be exposed to have infection. So the first few viruses, the virions of COVID, would get in your system. They'd start building up, building up, building up, building up. So it would take an incubation from that early data. We were seeing it took about 24 to 48 hours for you to become positive on a rapid test. So to be infectious with COVID. So you'd be increasing. There's an infectious threshold. And then above that infectious threshold, you'd be testing positive on the rapid test, because you're going to be infectious for a small period of time before you test positive on that rapid test. It's not a perfect sync. It's a good estimate. So essentially, if you're positive on a rapid test, you're always going to be infectious. But if you're negative, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're not infectious. It just means that you're shedding at low levels, that you don't have enough of a viral buildup to be positive on the test to meet that limited detection. But for PCR, in the early days, it was being detected there, and you were positive on that. So you'd get an early warning with the PCR, or be told, hey, you're at the tail end of your infection, so you're recently infected with COVID. You didn't really know at the time. But now PCR tests have been standardized against rapid tests, so we actually know a pretty good window, so that if we have this thing called the cycle threshold value, which I'll show later on, which is the number of cycles it takes to replicate enough COVID to hit a certain level of viral load. So it's like culturing the COVID and letting it grow to a certain population level. And once you hit that population level, you say it took this number of cycles to reach that, of culturing cycles. That's the high level version of what that is. And so like a lower number of cycles to hit this total population level of COVID that you were growing, that means you're really sick. But if it takes more cycles, you're less sick. So we can actually correlate now PCR through this cycle threshold value to infectiousness. But at this time in COVID in early 2020, even up to like 2021, we didn't have that. So we couldn't really necessarily say that. So just to ground where we were versus where we are. So after that, so we're increasing, you're going to hit an infection threshold. You're going to be detectable by rapid test, and then it's going to keep going. So everything colored in here, you would be infectious for. The infection duration early on was about 10 to 14 days. And that's really important because that was like the median or average infection, slightly different things, but they were both coming out to about the same infection duration. But recall, we only had a 10-day quarantine period. So that means that people were escaping this quarantine period with infectiousness still. So you were able to spread for a little bit before you started quarantining, because symptoms would occur right here. So again, you're infectious for a period of time, probably about 24 hours before you would start quarantining yourself, isolating yourself from others. And then for a period of time after symptoms go, most people would go, oh, I'm not sick anymore. I don't feel sick. They'd integrate with other people, start interacting. But again, for this period of time in this little triangle right here, you're still going to be infectious, so you can still spread that infection. And then once you stop testing positive, there's going to be a couple days after that where you're still potentially infectious to others, where you can still spread it. So it's important to know that like our quarantine period was just never long enough. based off of what we know about the duration of COVID infection. But if I was going to do that chart in early 2020, this is how I would have done it. So you have increasing points to infectiousness, you increase again to having symptoms, and then the infection goes up, it goes down. The rapid test is able to detect somewhere within the mid-infectiousness level, and then you test negative, go below that limit of detection, but you're still infectious for a little bit. You hit that end of infectiousness window, and then you would be going down in viral load, still testing positive on PCR, continue down to hopefully 0. So you clear the virus entirely. And then some nuance within this is that infections aren't going to follow a linear process like this. Oftentimes they're going to be squiggly. So you can see I drew here in the red. You're going to get sicker and a little better at times throughout the infection. This can happen within the same day or in the following days. So you'll start to feel really sick maybe on this day 3, day 4, you'll start to feel a little better, but then you'll feel even worse on day 5. So it's going to be a little bit of ebb and flow throughout the same day, and then between days. You're not always going to feel the same level of sick the whole time, and then progressively feeling better. So that's a little bit of nuance there. And then also with asymptomatic infections. So if I take another color, let's say blue, so you're going to increase, but get below that level of symptoms and maybe hold it, and then start heading down. So these are people that wouldn't necessarily always test. They wouldn't be detected. They would not show symptoms, but they would still be infectious for COVID and be able to pass it to other people. And this is like sort of the insidious thing behind the scenes. Because if you're not thinking you're sick, then you're not testing. And also our rapid tests for asymptomatic infection are hit and miss because there were like, we'll just say 90 different rapid tests out in the market. Not all of them are created equal. Some are better than others. FlowFlex is still one of the best rapid antigen tests that target the nucleocapsid protein. Some early tests targeted the spike protein instead of the nucleocapsid protein, and since spike changes and mutates so quickly, the nucleocapsid protein still mutates and changes, but much slower over time. The tests began to lose sensitivity because they were less well matched. They've never been updated since the beginning. So this is something that would happen. And then some people, due to lack of communication with the public, they're thinking, oh, if I have a light pink positive line in the rapid test, I'm not infectious. It has to be a dark, solid positive line like it shows on the instruction sheet. Well, other studies like with FlowFlex and other rapid tests came out and said, no, here is the breadth of different signals you can get: a very, very barely detectable light pink to a super solid, almost maroon, dark, strong line color. Those actually are all infectious. So if you have any line on the test whatsoever, you are infectious to other people. You are actively sick with COVID. But like also the darker the line is, the higher the viral load, so the more infectious you are to other people. So like you're less infectious, but you're still infectious. So you still need to mask, you still need to isolate. And that was stuff that wasn't communicated well to the public. Now we get to the part where I'm saying why you shouldn't be referencing that old chart anymore. So several different things have happened simultaneously. So basically from mid to late 2022, I'm calling it 2023 here just to make it easy, to the present time of 2025. We're in late 2025 right now. This is sort of what the infection curve looks like. But I've lifted this from many different studies over the past few years. So first, the incubation period. So once you're initially exposed, the time for the virus to start building up to initial infectiousness, it has off-shifted a little bit to the right. So before it took like 24 to 48 hours. Now it's taking 24 to 72 hours to create that initial infectiousness. And then it's slowly increasing. So you'll see that I have that original curve that I showed above plotted in this light gray here below. And you can see the entire curve shifted to the right. So we'll have infectiousness increasing, and then everything that's colored here is infectious. Then we have symptoms occurring. So you'll see symptoms occur right here after a couple of days. And then after symptoms occur, it is now taking on average 3 to 6 days post symptoms occurring for you to get that first positive test on your rapid test. So the big implication of this is that a lot of people are saying, oh, I took my COVID test, it tested negative. I took my flu test, it tested negative. I'm sick, I don't really know what it is, but hey guys, it's not COVID. Well, it's still probably COVID because of how this has shifted to the right. So again, you're going to have symptoms for a couple days before your viral load is high enough to detect that you are actually sick with COVID, because again, those rapid tests have lost sensitivity. So what does that mean, lost sensitivity? So we'll say that initially the threshold for detection was right here, that once you got above that, then you would test positive. You'd have that pink signal on your rapid test. Well, now due to the loss of sensitivity, it's taking this much, a much higher viral load, to have that first initial positive on your rapid test. So we have a higher threshold now. So you'll see that the rapid test is much higher with the viral load to have that first positive. And again, this is going to occur a couple days after, like 3 to 6 days after symptoms have already started in your infection. So now people are going a very long period of time thinking, oh, I'm not sick with COVID. I took a test. It said it was negative. They're never testing again. But during that whole time, from a couple days before symptoms start to a couple days post symptoms start, you're going to be infectiously spreading COVID to others, being like, oh, it's just my allergies. Oh, I just have a tickle in my throat. Oh, it's just a cough. No, you're infectious with COVID. If you waited 3 to 6 days and then took the test again after those symptoms started, then you would test positive and you would be like, oh, yep, I have COVID. And then the infection will go back down. You would test negative a little earlier now than you would have before, once that first positive hits, and then it'll go down. Again, you're still going to be infectious for a period of time afterwards, so the triangle is going to be much bigger right here, where you're still going to be infectious post that negative rapid test, and then you'll be going down the same thing with the PCR. Well, another thing is that from the most recent data, we've seen that not only has this curve shifted right, but the duration of illness seems to have increased. The median infection length right now is 18 to 22 days. So before it was about 10 to 14 days. Now it's 18 to 22 is what we have as the estimate for the median COVID infection, which brings a lot of problems. So let's go over to this chart right here. So the implications of this rate shifting is that, one, most people won't test with a rapid test at the correct time and will therefore miss their COVID infection. That scenario I already brought up. And then again, due to the sensitivity loss of the rapid antigen test, the RAT, there has been no update in variant matching since it was first created. So they created it to match like the original like Wuhan strain of COVID, but we've had many, many variants since then, thousands of variants since then. And they just never have been updated because there hasn't been a drive or a desire to update this. So now it requires higher viral load to actually have that positive, which now typically occurs several days after symptoms have started versus before you would get it like a little bit before symptoms started on that rapid positive test. And again, this has implications on Paxlovid. So the initiation of Paxlovid is no longer syncs with the peak viral load. So once those symptoms start, if you happen to be lucky and be at the tail end of this curve, like have a very high viral load on the left side, right after symptoms started, you're supposed to take Paxlovid within the first 5 days of symptoms. So for a lot of people, when they're testing positive day 3 to 6, so people testing positive days 5 and 6, you're already outside of the window of when you are recommended to take Paxlovid if you're able to access it due to the financial barriers now and it not being covered by some insurances, and people having to pay $1,500 out of pocket for a 5-day course. So now the peak viral load initially was very close to the early side of symptoms. Now the peak viral load is sort of like several days into the symptoms, so it's not matching the infection peak viral load anymore. So you're not suppressing the highest levels, you're suppressing lower levels while it's still increasing. So it's not matching in that way. And now due to the increased length, the duration of infection, 5 days just really isn't cutting it. It's not sufficient enough time to sort of suppress the COVID infection for long enough to make it so that you're already on the other side of it. And again, like people are infectious for far longer than they were prior, like in the before 2022. So the 2019, 2020 to 2022. And there's now this longer tail end of post symptomatic infection where you're still infectious, and then pre-symptomatic period where you're infectious. So people are just like massively spreading COVID without being aware of it. So I mentioned those 22 days. What does this population spread sort of look like right now for the duration of a COVID infection? Well, on the early side of it, there's documentation of it only being 3 days. This is mostly in young children, where we say, oh, it takes about 3 days for them to get infected and clear the infection. I think this is lacking nuance. I think we're scaling adult infections down to child infections, and that we're not fully accounting for the change, like the lower level of viral load that's needed to have an infection in children. I think this is an artifact of how we actually measure COVID, that it's based in adults and then being applied backwards to children. But I digress. So on the far left side of this, we have 3 days. The median infection length is resting around 22 days. And then on the high end for a typical infection, it can last as long as 90 days. But there are still a significant number of people that are having even upwards to a year-long infection, a chronic infection that lasts that long. The longest documented active infection of COVID, where they're continually testing positive. So they have a very long chronic infection and are infectious to people for a very long period of time, was 776 days. So this is an active case that's been documented for that long. So this is over 2 years of an infection. So COVID infections can last this long, which is insane. And ultimately, what does this tell us? Well, one, that the 10-day isolation was never long enough, that it needed to be at least 14 days, probably 21 days in length to be safe, which is 3 weeks. So now when the CDC shortened it in 2022 down to 5 days, that was woefully inadequate to prevent transmission and spread of COVID. Now in 2025, a single COVID infection being a median length of 22 days, that's going to burn up the average US worker's allotted sick time for the entire year just from a single infection, which means that there's an incentive for people to return to work while sick, or to just not take time off in the first place. So to go in to work sick. And then people can spread infection to others for months, even years at a time. It's not uncommon to test positive for up to 90 days. My partner had an infection a year and a half ago that took about, I think, 84 days. I have a series documenting that. You can look that up. And then children are statistically more likely to have a shorter infection duration. But again, I think this is unfounded at this point, but I think I'm going to eventually be proven right in this, that I think this is probable bias. We're using adult criterion to quantify child infection duration. So it's possible that they need less virus because they have smaller bodies to be infected and infectious to others than adults do. And that there is also incentive for parents to send kids back to school early while still sick. So there might be bias in the data collection that way, where we're saying, oh, the kid's no longer sick, and they're just sending them to school sick because they can't take time off work. And maybe there's even like a max number of sick days that the child is allotted at their school for attendance policies. And then again, children also can't effectively test or advocate for themselves. So at large, their infections are largely ignored due to the early COVID-19 messaging. So this was during Trump and Biden's administration, predominantly Biden's administration, where they were saying like, oh, COVID does not impact children at all, has no impact on them. They can't like get long COVID, et cetera, et cetera. But we know this is not true. I've been saying this since way back then, that everything I've seen in the data has shown that children can have serious impacts from COVID, that they can have the chronic disabilities from COVID, and that they can get long COVID at probably similar rates to adults. And that's exactly what we're seeing at this time. So a lot of this is just ignoring the impact on children, which is going to have long-term repercussions on our population at large when we have effectively massively disabled an entire upcoming generation. So these are all the things that this tells us. And since this has already gotten pretty long, I'm going to take a pause here. So in the next video, we'll go over some nuances of infection that I started to talk about, some Paxlovid rebound, we'll talk about recombination and then cryptic lineages, as these are all parts of acute infection. These are sort of like hidden phases of acute infection that we can go through. So that's all for now. Tune in for part 3. Hope you have a good day.